Welcome back to creating this little game. So far we had an overview of Godot, and in the last video we started to create our jumping cat. In this video we are going to start creating the actual game level. And most importantly for that, we're going to create something the cat can stand on, so we don't have to continuously jump. And that should be quite a straightforward concept, so let's jump right in. So far we have a single scene in our game, and that contains the player. You can think of this one as just a folder containing all the player stuff, and then we're going to put a link into another folder where the actual game is happening. The major advantage of that is that if we make a change to our player scene, that change would also appear in all the other scenes. In our particular game, this doesn't matter because we only have one particular game level, but if you had 20 levels, this would be really powerful. And that whole process is called instancing, where you put one scene into another scene, which you see all the time in Godot. So let's create the actual game scene for our game. So I just started Godot, and it always starts by showing you the 3D scene. So let's go to 2D, and we can see a new empty scene. And we can use that one to create our game level. Although from the last time, down here, we still have our player level. We still have our player scene and our player script. It's nicely down there, but for now, let's create the main level. So let me zoom in a little bit. And now we have to choose which kind of node we want to start with. We could use a 2D scene, and that would be perfectly fine. But I will use a different scene, and that's just called a node. And this is the simplest possible node in Godot. So by itself, it doesn't really have anything. So you have some basic things in here, but this is a node that pretty much can't do anything by itself. It can just hold other elements. And I'm gonna rename it to level, just so we're clear what we're doing. And now the magic is going to happen. I click on this little instance icon, and Godot shows us all the available scenes we have. In our case, we only have one, the player scene. So I double click on it, and we can see the cat in our level scene. And you have this little film icon where you can open the scene itself. So if I click on it, we can see our original player cat. And it also tells you that it has a script and that you can't select the children. And you can also make it visible or invisible. But we don't need any of this right now. For now, I just want to move it roughly to where it's going to be in the game. And yeah, it looks about right. And now we can make one more change just to test this game. So far I clicked on F6 to run the scene. But right now, if I click F5, Godot says this scene has never been saved. And I want to save it, and we get our folder. So I create a new folder, and I'm going to call this one level, and that's going to be where we save all our level stuff. So I just save it in here. And if I can play this game correctly, we can still see our cat. And if I press F5 again, now we come to the proper one. It says no main scene has ever been defined, select one. And we do want to do that, so I select, and I select the level scene. And just to explain what this means, when we press F5, let me close this one. When we press F6, we only start one particular scene. So we don't need a start scene. But when we press F5, we start basically the entire game. And for Godot to do that, it needs to know what scene to start on. But now, every time we click F5, it's going to launch the level scene since we selected that one. And then we can go straight to our game. And it's also now, if we launch Godot again, this is the scene that's going to come up by default. So it's going to make things a little bit easier. We still have the same problem, so let me just run it again, that if we don't press up continuously, the cat is going to fall into just nothingness forever. So let's create a floor. To do that, what we're basically going to do is add a static body 2D to this entire scene that the cat can sit on or stand on. So to do that, I click on level and Control A to add another node. And this time I want to add a static body 2D. So this is going to be for static objects that don't move. And in our case, this is just going to be the floor. So I create it. And then just as before, Godot is going to give us a warning that this node has no shape. And that's not a problem, we can just add another node, and this is a collision shape that we want. It's down here. So just like for the player cat, that here we have a collision shape, and now this one needs an actual shape. And for this one, I'm going to use a new rectangle shape 2D. So now we have this little blue icon that is going to be a physical object. You can't see it, so it's kind of like using the force, but we can enlarge it by clicking on the little red dots. And it doesn't need to be large. It just needs to be large enough that the cat can stand on it. And that should be about right. So I select it and I'm going to rename it just so we don't lose it. Yeah, floor seems like a good name. And then I'm going to click again on this little icon to make sure I can't select the children. And now I'm just going to move it roughly below the cat. And this should now be working. So if I click on F5 now, and without pressing anything, our cat is now going to stand in the middle of the screen. But I can still jump. And it's always going to end up there. So we can never go further down than this point. But there's another problem now. That if I keep on pressing the up button, our cat can jump as many times as it wants in the air. So we can basically fly, which would kind of break the game. So let's fix this part. And for that, we need to go to the player code. So either click on this little script icon here, or I'll go to script itself. And then we can see the code from the last tutorial. And what we want is that the player can only jump if he or she is on the floor. And Godot has a nice function for that. It is called isOnFloor. So that we have a nice if statement that if the player is pressing the up button, and if he is on the floor, then we want to jump. But let's test this now, and it is not going to work. So I press up now, but nothing is happening. And there's a reason for that. The reason is that Godot does not know what the floor is. And since it doesn't know what the floor is, this part here is never true. And since it's never true, our cat is never jumping regardless of how often I press the up button. So let's talk about why it doesn't know what the floor is. So far in our code, what we basically do is that we create a vector 2D, and then whenever we press the jump button, we move up in the y direction. So we go negative. So we just decrease y by a certain amount, and for us this looks like a jump. But Godot does not know that this is up. By default for Godot, a floor does not exist because Godot assumes that we have a top-down game. Basically like Zelda or Pokemon or the early GTA games. That you look down on the game and you stand on the floor all the time, so floor doesn't really exist. So we have to tell Godot that up is going in the negative y direction. And this is actually quite easy to do. All we need is a vector like we had before that has a direction that points upwards. And then we just put this into the move and slide function. And how to do this is actually super easy. The second argument, and when you add a comma here, it tells you the linear velocity. We already have that one, but now we want the up direction for vector 2D. So now we need a vector that points upwards. So on the x, it's 0, and in the y, it has to point -1. So it's pointing upwards. But we don't actually need to worry about numbers. We can just type vector 2 and up. And this is an upward pointing vector. And now this entire function knows where up is. And now that it knows what up is, it also knows what a floor is. And that one should work then. So if I press up now, this one's working. And if I press up all the time, it only works once I'm on the floor. So it's working well. And there's actually one other way to do this. So let me remove this part. And instead of isOnFloor, there's another one that's called isOnWall. And this only checks if the player is touching any kind of wall. So in a top-down game, this would just be if Link is touching a wall, for example. And this one should even work if we don't know what up is. So yeah, this one works just the same way. And both are decent enough, but I think the earlier one is much clearer in terms of what we're doing. so I'm going to keep that one. And that brings us quite a bit closer to a working game. And let's do some few more changes. The first one is UI up is mostly designed for user interfaces. That's why it's called UI. And also just pressing the up button isn't exactly great. So instead, I want to be able to press either the up button or the space button to jump. So we need our own key bindings. And we can do that quite easily. We just need to go to Project, Project Settings, and then there's an input map. And we have to start by just creating an action. And I will call this jump. And then I click on add. And now at the bottom we have jump. Now we have to add which buttons belong to this kind of action. And you can do quite a few different things here. I just want key, and this stands for keyboard key. And now I press a button. So the first one is up. So that's the up arrow. And then I have another key, and that's space. That's the space bar. And you can pretty much add any button you want in here. But yeah, that's all I needed here. So I close this one. And now instead of UI up, I just type jump, and Godot already knows this one. If I run the game now, I can either press up or I can press space. Both is working. And that already feels much better. And there's one more thing I would like to do. And that is by going to Project, Project Settings, and back to General. And I want to go to Window, hope I find it, Display and Window. And right now, our game's default resolution is 1024 by 600. So it's actually really small. And to change that, we can change the width to 1280 and the height to 720. So it's a bit larger, and you can make this much larger as you want. But I think this feels like a much better resolution. So yeah, that's all we needed for now. And what you should be seeing is that this blue line here should now be a little bit larger. And this is what we actually see in the game. But yeah, and this one is also larger, and we're getting much closer to a proper game. And in the next video, we're going to add all the obstacles. And I'll see you then.